Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This week I'm going to put together a double page spread in my Hobonichi Techo, recording my most recent read, a book called The Ministry for the Future by Stanley Robinson. I had a lot of thoughts about this one. Let's get started. This was a very interesting book. I can't say that I necessarily enjoyed it, even though I feel like probably everybody on the planet should read this book. It should be required reading, mainly because it's an important book over climate change, which is a very important topic. This was the first time I've actually ever used a kit for a spread. I am not typically a big fan of kits. I haven't ever used them in my daily planning. Sometimes I've used stickers that are related, but never anything from a supplier that actually had a theme to it. And I found this one on Etsy. It's called Bookworm. Yet, as you could tell from some of these pages, it was meant to be in a planner, maybe as a weekly spread. However, I decided to use it as a backdrop to journaling about this book instead. And I really liked the color scheme. I also supplemented the decorations with a couple of stamps from an Everyday Explorers kit, a highlighter from Mildliner, and as you can see here, some of my own washi tape. The Ministry for the Future was published by Orbit in 2020, and I am very glad I did not read this book in the middle of the pandemic, because it was classified as science fiction, particularly in this new emerging genre nicknamed cli-fi, which is hilarious to me because it stands for climate fiction, and for some reason I have wanted to call it clit fic, but that's a completely different genre than climate fiction, or cli-fi, as it should be classified. This, though, man, this book, it was a rough read for me. I almost quit after the first chapter because it read more like horror than it did science fiction. It was tough, and had my friend not said to stick it out past the first chapter, get past the first chapter before you make a decision whether or not to read this brick of a book, because it was almost 600 pages in my copy. So it took me a little while to read this. If she had not said that, I might have set this book aside, and I would have been doing myself a disservice. The book itself felt a little too prescient for me for comfort. It's set in the future, but it's got to be a near future, like just on the cusp of it, because it read like a current day setting, as most of the organizations that it mentioned are actual organizations that currently exist and operate in our systems of government and in our treaties. It was just hitting close to home. I already tend to think that environmentally, we are on a doomsday track if we do not make some significant changes. And having those worst case scenarios concerning climate change actually happen within this book, it was a lot, and it was, to me, terrifying. The blurb on the front of the book by Jonathan Latham, best known for his novels Motherless Brooklyn and The Fortress of Solitude, and it said, "The best science fiction, nonfiction novel I've ever read." To just give you a little overview about the book itself, the Ministry for the Future is a group that is established by the Paris Agreement, and their mission is really to advocate for future generations, as if those future generations' rights are just as valid as the generations currently inhabiting the planet. One of the main protagonists is Mary Murphy. She is the head of the agency. They have determined that climate change is the biggest threat to mankind's continued existence. This happens after there's an unprecedented week-long heat wave resulting in the death of upwards of 20 million people in India. And it is under those horrifying circumstances that the book opens. So you can understand why I needed the encouragement of my friend to keep reading this book after that first chapter. Time for a tea break. I love this Celestial Seasonings peppermint tea. It's so soothing, and that was something I needed after journaling about this book. This book came highly recommended by a lot of very notable individuals, but the cover, man, they did not do this book any favors with this cover. The cover is awful. It is so blah, given the topic and the immediacy of the book. It has nothing to recommend it. But I'm a big believer in never judging a book by its cover. And it's a good thing, too, or I never would have picked this one up. I don't know if you can tell, but at the top of the spread of the first page, up in that upper right-hand corner, I rated this book a 9.5 on a scale of 1 to 10. I know there will be some people who are like, why did you give this such a high rating if you didn't like the book? It was not a fun read. It wasn't based on my own personal enjoyment of the book because I didn't really enjoy it that much, to be honest. But it's based rather on the fact that I believe it to be a very important book and an incredibly well written and well researched book, and quite possibly a book that in the future will be regarded as having been a predictor of certain climate change issues that we will experience. God, I really hope that's not the case, though, because in this book, life gets pretty bleak before it starts to get better. It was also one of the most intellectually challenging books I've read in the past couple of years. The sections on economics in particular were just, frankly, they were beyond my ken. Those sections that read more like textbooks, I know they were necessary for the setup of the book and its theme, but they were the least interesting portions of the book for me. I really enjoyed the sections of the book that were dealing with the people that were being affected by climate change, the refugees, the activists, and frankly, the eco-terrorists, as well as some of the administrators that worked at the Ministry for the Future. Those were my favorite sections. There were some pretty big info dump portions when it came to the segments on economics, the statistics, the science behind climate change, and the solutions, which were all really very complex. I tended to skim some of those sections. However, the author did utilize mercifully short chapters. He used multiple point of view characters, some of whom are even anonymous. They go unnamed for the entire chapter. And occasionally he would use very different narrative styles. There's a whole chapter that reads almost like a script where each person is only mentioned by initials and no quotes are used at all. The craft of the book was excellent, but it was very long. I felt every page in my bones. I would still highly recommend it. However, I would also recommend a light, fun, comfort read, either simultaneously or directly after completing the book, just for a little fun and light afterwards. Well, that's it for this week, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for sticking with me. Bye now.